Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast, celebrating this January of 2025, a full 4 years of bringing the best content to the world of STEM and technical education every single week. Another incredible story of somebody who's doing something incredible themselves in the world of STEM education, technical education, or in the world of industry. Today, we have somebody who is no stranger to the Tech Ed Podcast, somebody doing some great things in a separate industry, in the industry of healthcare. Believe it or not, as we deliver this episode, this is episode number 200 of the Tech Ed Podcast. Hard to believe that we've had 199 episodes preceding this one, but that is in fact the truth. Episode 200, we figured that there would be no better guest to join us for our 200th episode than the individual who was our second guest. So going from 2 to 200, his name is Rick Anderson. At the time that Rick was with us the last time, he was leading a company called Smart Choice MRI, doing some great things in the MRI and healthcare space, has since exited that company. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, very successfully, by the way. You'll also recall from that episode that Rick was on the ground floor of a little company known as WebMD. One of the first employees and team members of that company, helped figure out how to make that model work and grow it to the incredible brand that it was and continues to be. So he is no stranger to successful organizations and understanding how to run them. He's now running a brand new one. He's the chief executive officer of a company called the Hive Health. We are going to get into all of that with Rick, but let me first start by welcoming not just an incredible business leader, but also somebody who I'm happy to admit is a super, super great friend. Rick Anderson, thanks for being with us.
Matt, thank you. And thanks for admitting our friendship.
Yeah, absolutely. Figured we'd get that out of the way right out of the box. Absolutely. Because we have plenty of history together. We've had a great time and just watching your career develop over the years and your incredible leadership skill, your incredible vision. We're going to hear about that today. Really, really fun to have you on. As we mentioned in the intro, you are here for our very second episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Here we are now almost 200 episodes later with our 200th episode. Tell us a little bit about in the 4 years since the last time you were here, what's been going on with Rick Anderson?
Yeah, well, thank you, Matt. I mean, it's interesting if you think back to 4 years ago, and I'm not perfect at my dates and months, but this was right about the time when this thing called COVID showed up.
Exactly.
And the parallel path we were taking as a business at Smart Choice was we were getting ready for an exit. Mm-hmm. And as you know, you've been through them yourself, it's the scariest, hardest thing you'll ever do. And when we got done, I would say, yes, it was the hardest thing I've ever done.
But, and when you say an exit, meaning you were selling the company or there's some transaction that's taking
correct.
place.
Yeah, we were looking to sell the company and of all things a strategic, a competitor bought us.
Okay.
And during that COVID process, there was a lot of things that for all of us were very difficult. But at the end of the day, we got it done. And then I think like every seasoned executive who runs through that process, you wake up the next day and you're like, well, now who am I? Mm-hmm. My wife loves me, my kids love me, but like, what am I going to do next? And so you take that fabled walk on the beach and you think about, well, now what? And I know you agree with this, Matt. I just believe we're called to work.
For sure.
And as long as someone still wants to hear what I have to say, I'm going to keep going.
Awesome.
So start thinking about what's next.
Yeah, no, I love it. And believe me, it is going to be a long, long time before nobody cares what Rick Anderson has to say because you've got such a great background, such a great history, so many great stories, so much to learn from Rick Anderson. And certainly that fabled walk on the beach. I had one similar to yours, actually, after we sold our manufacturing company. I've told the story before on the podcast, but that was really what launched my journey into securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent, having that mission, having a reason to get up every day, doing important work. Yes, it's great to run a successful business and a successful company, and nothing wrong with that, helps you invest in the future, but having that mission right alongside that, really, really important as well. As you're living out your mission, you're living it in an age where healthcare is really transforming and changing in a lot of ways that people see and probably some ways that they don't. How has the world of healthcare changed in the 4 years since you exited and the last time that you were here on the Tech Ed Podcast, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had better news. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the news lately, which we really don't need to go into the gritty details of, but sadly, it's a lot worse. I mean, basically, and most people, I think the average patient, the average consumer of healthcare doesn't realize that today, about 50% of health systems are operating in the red.
Wow.
They've got maybe 60 days of cash on hand. The labor shortage is terrible. We all saw about the traveling nurses. And there's a very, very big disconnect between the payers and the health systems and the providers. And we think we're doing something pretty special to help that. But you see consolidation, you see closings because healthcare and the health system, they're businesses.
Right.
And I wish I had better news, but I think better days are ahead.
Absolutely. And as we record this, actually, an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning going through all the changing phase of healthcare and just the whole idea that the economic model isn't working for the companies that are providing and the organizations that are providing healthcare. In many cases, it's not working for the patients. We hear the stories of doctors and practitioners and nurses and so on that are really burned out, working incredible hours. It's just insane in some cases how hard folks are working and really in some cases getting diminishing returns. And then to your point, the providers, if half of them are in the red, this is a model that is fundamentally and financially broken. It's something that we need to fix, and lots of different things that need to happen. As I think about technology, as I think about the way things are advancing in every market space, not just healthcare, I've got to believe artificial intelligence work is already playing a role and is going to play a role in the future of healthcare. Talk with us, because I know this is something that fascinates you as much as it does me. How is AI going to change the world of healthcare?
Well, it's interesting. If you rewind the tape to 4 years ago, we had a really good relationship with the folks at GE Healthcare, and some of the GE executives came and flew in and talked to us about this thing they called AI. Like, when we're like, well, we've heard of it, but what do you mean? They're like,
Sure.
Well, what we want to do is use images in radiology to kind of have, I always boil AI, maybe it's very simplistic, but I boil AI down to basically an if-then. If this happens, then this should be the outcome. And so that was really the first we started hearing about it. But today, you're seeing things that are a little bit difficult, like claims processing denials. That's not fun. We've seen that.
Of course.
But also, I think there's price and labor issues that really have to come into the fold for AI. Number one, on the labor side, the average physician, when he or she finishes rounds that day, opens up their inbox to over 100 emails.
Wow.
And it's not like you and I where we can just say, I'll get that tomorrow.
Right.
Someone's life depends on it. And so there's already a big toolbox, if you will, of tools that have come out to say, how can I help that physician automate their just the simple things like their email responses? Something like that is going to save a lot of time. And it's amazing as you see AI every day, how fast it's coming. The other thing is sort of the price piece. And that's what we're doing is how data and a robust database of what we do in particular around devices in the orthopedic, cardiac, spine, and lab space. How do you teach someone that when you see a price of something, that this is what you should do about it? And I think that's, again, labor and pricing is probably where it's coming.
And I know that's a big reason for the existence, and we'll get into it, of the Hive Health and taking advantage of, the huge amounts of data and also the opportunities to help people do their jobs more efficiently. You're certainly familiar with a platform called Ren that we use in several of our businesses. Denise, who's been on the podcast, CEO of that company, as you kind of talk through a physician using some AI agent to help respond to these 100 emails that they have to get to after they've done their real job, which is spending time with patients and providing care, and being able to automate some of that kind of speaks back to some of the things that Ren is doing. So it'll be interesting to explore a little bit about how some of the things that you're seeing in healthcare maybe benefit other market spaces and how those market spaces can benefit healthcare and the healthcare market itself. I mean, is it fair to say that it's broken, that it's not working? Kind of touched on that already. And then what is specifically wrong in addition to what you've already shared with us from, whether I'm a provider, whether I'm a doctor, whether I'm a nurse, whether I'm, working in some administrative role in healthcare? How is healthcare broken today?
I'm certainly not a financial analyst, but if you look at the financial markets, you'll see something often termed in charts called the death cross. And the death cross is basically where, in the case of healthcare, where reimbursement continues to go down every day and costs continue to go up. And where those two intersect, that's where your problem becomes.
Sure.
So if you're taking a spine surgeon and he or she spent years of their life being top of their game, they make half as much money on a procedure today than they made 5 or 10 years ago.
Wow.
They're working harder. The responsibility they have to have everything loaded in the charts, the notes, all the stuff that they worry about for risk and liability has compounded that.
Sure.
So it's a classic case of they're working harder and making less money. And what you're seeing is, now I wouldn't call it a great exodus, but you're seeing a number of physicians saying, I'm not doing this. This isn't worth it. And that's really sad. And it goes beyond physicians. It's nurse burnout. It's the administrators. Yeah, something's got to change.
Well, and in as much as we have a challenge in healthcare of recruiting, more people to work in healthcare, whether it's the nurses, whether it's the physicians. And on a macroeconomic basis, even if somebody's looking and saying, hey, maybe I'm not making as much money today as I was 5 years ago, that person's 35, 40 years old, they're probably not necessarily in mass leaving the space, right? I mean, that's what they've been trained on. And that's where there's expertise is. But at the same time, as younger people look at what do they want to do with their career, how long does it take to become a doctor, how much money are they going to invest through that process? And so you start to see this attrition of people maybe going into healthcare, which is even scarier. And by the way, anytime you call something a death cross, you didn't even have to explain what that was. I knew that was going to be a bad thing. And you're right, you don't need to be a financial analyst to recognize the fact that if your reimbursements are for business people, your revenue is dropping and your costs are going up, at some point if those two become inflected, there's going to be a big problem, and also some need for disruption in that space, which is, I think, exactly what you're trying to do. So let's get into a little bit about how does the Hive Health start to address and help providers improve care, and also address some of the challenges that you've already outlined for us, Rick.
Well, before we go on from the last comment, I just want to add one more thing, because the first few minutes of this interview, we talked about a lot of things that are wrong, right? I think what a lot of people from the consumer side forget is that healthcare is not a right. It's a service. It's just like if you call a plumber to have your sink fixed, they're going to come and take care of that.
Yep.
What is a right in this country is access to healthcare, which we really do a good job. And now there are simple versions of that. Like if you need healthcare, walk into any emergency room, you will be treated. So I want to make sure before we leave that comment that it's not all broken.
Right.
Because it's based on genuine and compassionate care. And I think as a country, we do really good at that.
Thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
We both recognize there are some challenges. There's also some really good things happening in healthcare. It's not completely decimated. We just have to make some tweaks and changes as demographics change, as economic realities change. So talk about the work that you're doing and how that fits in.
Well, I think what's really enjoyable, and you and I are great friends, have been friends for years, is that the story begins with a dear friend of mine that I've known since 1995. Rich Kennedy was the first hire I made at WebMD.
Oh, really?
And he was with us for the very beginning, and then went off and spent close to 30 years as an implanting device rep in the cardiac rhythm management space. So he worked for St. Jude Medical, then Abbott Labs in the Cleveland Clinic market. And the way the Hive Health started is in 2014, Rich walked into one of his biggest clients and they said, sorry, you're no longer needed here. Because what happened was the health system decided, well, to save money, instead of going with 4 vendors and having what we call in our industry an all-play model, we're just going to pick 2 and save money so the rest of you can just go home. So he called his wife, Andrea, and said, don't spend any more money. I lost 40% of our income.
Wow.
And that day he said, I'm going to do something about this. And so he started a company that was originally in the CRM or cardiac rhythm management space. Okay. And he promoted an all-play model where he went to health systems and said, there's a better way to get the prices you deserve without just kicking people to the curb. He was very successful, had 4 clients within a couple of years. And all that time he was calling me saying, I think I have something.
So what was his model? I mean, what was he doing different?
If you think about it, and this is in manufacturing, this is in every industry, we've all been sort of lulled to sleep at this idea of a request for pricing and proposal, an RFP.
Yep.
Please, Mr. or Mrs. Vendor, tell me what I can get this for.
Right.
And he said, no, I know the prices. And I want to know why a hospital A has a price of $1, but hospital B down the street has a price of $1.75, and that's not right.
Right.
And so he began in the earliest stages. This was literally packing slips of purchase orders on his desk. Today, it's a robust database we call Honeycomb that has almost 1 million lines of data within it, where we have figured out what the price is, not should be, not benchmarking, not a maybe, not a we think, but what we know the price for an implantable defibrillator to a pedicle screw for use for spine surgery. What is that price around the country? And he had
an average, or that's the lowest, or that's how do you arrive at that price?
It's the lowest, but it's not just here's a low price, but it's a price we personally have negotiated within the last 12 to 24 months. So when we go to a system, small or big, and we say, this is how much we can save you. And what we do is we do an assessment of their purchase order data. We figure out what their spend is. We typically save about 22%.
Wow.
And the supply chain team at these systems are very talented people, but these products are so esoteric and so unique to the surgery that's being done. they're buying Band-Aids and laptops. They can't know how to do all this.
And they know what they're paying for that. They don't necessarily know what the market is paying for that. So their database of comparison isn't going to necessarily be what yours would be.
Correct. And a very good observation. And what we use in the healthcare industry are GPOs, or group purchasing organizations. So they all belong to one of the 5 or 6. And then they get benchmarking data, or they get a report saying you're in the X decile, you're doing good for who you are. And we firmly believe that if you're a little rural health system in Mobile, Alabama, or you're the largest health system in New York, why should the price be different?
Right.
And we look at, it's funny because we first thought when we really roll this out, the vendors are going to hate us. In reality, I'm sure there's days where some of them don't really like us. But what we've learned is that they respect us because we're giving them opportunity to compete fairly in an environment where someone arbitrarily could have just chosen, you don't get to participate. So leveling the playing field, having a transparent pricing model. And again, going back to the fact that, like, if you make this total joint for a knee in Memphis, Tennessee, where most of them are made, why is it you can sell it with a profit for $800 in Germany, but you tell one health system it's $5,000 and the one down the street it's $2,200? That price arbitrage has to go away.
Right, absolutely. So if I'm understanding the model correctly, your client is going to be the healthcare provider of some version of it, whether it's a group purchasing organization or it's an individual provider or somewhere in the middle. And the service you're providing is essentially you're spending a significant part of your budget on this family of products, and you may be doing that in a little bit of a data vacuum because you don't necessarily know what you could or should be paying for that. We're going to bring information, data, and we'll get into the AI piece in a little bit as well, to bear on helping them analyze their spend, understanding how they can more efficiently invest and build their inventory or their product portfolio of those products. And the result of that on average is they're saving 22% a year of what we would call MRO or their annual spend is. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to layer on top of that, what makes us unique is that we're physician-led. Okay. So if you are a implanting joint surgeon.
I didn't know you were a physician.
No, it's funny. That's why they never let me go to the client. All kidding aside, I don't really spend much time at the health system client level because why would they want to care? I'm an opinion. But if, like Dr. Jim Stoll, who's a great friend of mine, he was my teammate at Smart Choice MRI.
I remember.
He's the president of our orthopedic team. And when he sits down with a vendor and says, listen, this is how much we're paying for this spinal product, they can't say to him, well, you don't know what the technology is, because he's like, no, I actually had kind of invented that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it levels the playing field. The other thing it does is it really bridges the gap between supply chain, the administrators, and the providers, because we kind of act like a marriage counselor. The first thing we do is we sit down with the physicians and say, we need your blessing. What do you want? What's important? And then we go back and we talk to the administrators and say, well, Bob and Sally and Jane, they want this. And we'll probably talk about this in a bit, but what's really exciting for us is that at Smart Choice, it was about lowering the cost of care. A patient could spend $600 on an MRI versus $5,000. Where we're trying to get to with the Hive is to say, if we lower the cost of the implantable device, the patient really benefits. We're not there yet. Quite frankly, lowering the cost of that device helps some of these places stay open.
Well, exactly. And I mean, if you think about that playing through over the course of time, if you're reducing that cost, and that, first of all, that provider is going to be able to, remain a viable organization, right? So if I'm operating in the red and all of a sudden I can save 22% on my spend, and that turns me into a profitable organization to where I can now reinvest in innovation, I can reinvest in people, I can reinvest if I need to in geography and locations and bricks and mortar and additional medical technology, all these things that we know are really, really important. Now we're starting to at least ensure that for the providers that are in existence now, that number isn't going to be cut in half in the next 10 years, which will, by the way, have an inverse relationship to cost, right? If we've got fewer providers, cost of care is going to increase. At a minimum, you're keeping it even. And over the course of time, as that organization becomes more and more financially stable, now they're in a position to, in a competitive landscape, lower the cost of care to the patient. Is that kind of where this is going?
Yeah. I mean, and there's two things to maybe sort of dovetail into that. Number one is, what do these systems do about it? So, in Wisconsin, we lost 2 hospitals last year alone, right? Or this year, just closed.
In 2024,
So in 2024, when that happens, the people in, let's say, a place like La Crosse, Wisconsin, now for something like a knee replacement, they got to drive an extra 30 minutes. Maybe it's not the end of the world, but access to care, like you talked about earlier, when that goes away, it's not coming back.
Sure.
And so that's something really we're passionate about, helping. Maybe it's a little bit of it, but if we do our part, we can sleep well at night knowing we did just that. The other thing is that the solution a lot of these hospital systems have, and you've seen it all over the country the last 4 or 5 years, is mergers and acquisitions, right? The reason they're doing that is that, again, they can't stay alive.
Sure.
So a bigger one comes along and absorbs them. But then the providers, aka the physicians, get mad. The nurses get mad because they see the administrative wing bloated. And it's not like, well, we just want to make all this money and pay the bonuses to the executives. It's that now you've got a real business.
Sure.
Hospitals used to be run by doctors.
Yep.
Now it's run by MBAs.
Sure.
And it kind of has to.
Right. Yeah, interesting. And as a result of that, then that physician who maybe had a more intimate relationship with how the hospital in this case was run, maybe more time to spend with their patients because it was a little bit less driven by by cash flow or by financial performance and a little bit more by the quality of care. So you can see where that goes in the wrong direction. One of the things that you mentioned, Rick, is that initially when you started doing this, that the what we would call suppliers or some people would call vendors, they saw you as a threat, but over the course of time, that kind of eased a little bit. So tell us a little bit. So I'm a medical device manufacturer, right? And I've got one healthcare customer that is paying $500 for whatever this widget is, and then somebody else paying $250. The last thing I want is for the person that's paying $500 to hear that somebody else is paying $250, because poof, there goes that margin on that product. And in some cases, the guy that's paying $500 might be subsidizing the one that's paying $250 in certain ways. So I could see where they would see that as a threat. So talk about, initially they saw it as a threat. Has that changed? And what's in it for the supplier or the vendor of that particular product?
Yeah. So, the best way I would really sum it up is to say that was an adverse reaction initially and based on lack of education. They thought we were just going to come in and just lower prices. That is our job. Right. That is our mission. However, there's nothing worse than not being able to lower your price because you can't even play. Right. So some of the small, big, and everywhere in between device companies would look at us and say, well, why should I help you with this particular suite of products and lower the price? Well, we would say, because these other 3 clients we have, you're not even in there. Right. So if you work with us and you help our client, we're going to help you in return. And so now we have, with some of the largest publicly traded device companies in the ortho and spine and cardiovascular space, we have standing biweekly meetings where we say, hey guys, we're going here next. We're going here. Who should we be talking to? How can we work together? Sure. In the Wild West of like spinal implants, there's 25 or 30 companies. Wow. So a supply chain executive really is stuck because he or she has got I can't have 25 products on the shelf. Right. But they all deserve a chance at that all play model. Sure. And that's where it's worked.
Well, and that drives innovation as well, right? If I'm a company that's innovating and I've got a new, better version of whatever this implant is, or, I'm certainly not an expert in the world of healthcare, but if I've got a better version of that, but I can't even get to the customer with that product because of the way the model works, everybody loses, right? The patient loses because they don't have access to that maybe new innovative product.
Absolutely.
The provider loses because they don't, and the company that innovated that product loses because they don't have the opportunity to turn that innovation and that investment into some type of return for them, right?
Yeah, and the way it really kind of fleshes itself out towards the end, which we're really excited about, is that, the providers will first say, well, okay, if I go to this different company and we save money, well, what's in it for me? Right. Oh, just more money for the executive? No. What we do is we sit down with the executive team and say, listen, these docs, they want a new robot. They want another cath lab technology. They want someone else to help them. They need some other equipment to help them. We bridge the gap and say, we're going to go save $5 million here, but we're going to earmark $1.5 million because these docs want this. Sure. Will you work with them? And it's really fun because that marriage really works.
Absolutely. So let's get into some of the data stuff. As you know, I'm fascinated by AI, and I'm not going to, certainly your secret sauce, if you will, is how you're analyzing some of this data and how you're cutting through it and how you're finding trends and patterns and using AI and machine learning to do that. Certainly not asking you to give up anything that you would consider proprietary, but just thinking about this generally, one way to look at this would be to have 50 people with whatever green bar printouts going through and comparing and circling and red highlighting and all this other stuff. The other way would be to create this massive database of information and then use whether it's a Microsoft Azure or TensorFlow or PyTorch or one of these different platforms to kind of cut through that data and find the patterns. What role is AI specifically playing in the work that you're doing? And again, without saying anything that you can't, how can you help our audience understand how this is kind of working behind the scenes?
Yeah. It all starts very small and very slow. So what we do in every one of our clients, we get a de-identified, so we have no patient information. We have nothing to worry about for privacy. We get a raw PO data pull, CSV or Excel, whatever. And these are 40 million lines of data. I mean, it's massive. So yeah, you're right. With a little green bar spreadsheet, you'd be there a long time. But what we did is we built a proprietary database called Honeycomb that takes that intake PO data. And then, I mean, it's not quite a million lines of data, but it's getting close. Wow. And so, the thing about healthcare that's tricky is if you have a drug-eluting stent, you're going to get it in this size, this size, this size. So every manufacturer has 50 different parts for the same thing based on size, based on a lot of variables. And so the first time, we literally had to go, when we built the raw guts of the database, and look at every line and be like, that is a non-cemented knee head. That is a drug-eluting stent in this side. So our physicians, our device experts had to go through line by line. Now the way it works is, I think we've run 17 clients through the process in the last couple of years.
Wow.
What happens is if I get a data set of, 5 million lines of data from hospital A in Chicago, I put it through Honeycomb, and the AI tool basically says, I've seen this. So if it's this, then this is the price. And then what it does is it shows us what the targeted price was. The PO price across 17 health systems in the last year. So you see that graph of like the discrepancy.
Sure.
And almost in every case, it's unbelievably shocking. The price discrepancy between systems. There's no logic. You'd think a big system would have the better price. Not even close. So that tool allows us to turn an assessment around in a matter of a day or two and tell a health system, we're going to save you this many millions of dollars, and we're ready to get started.
Wow.
And our model is very straightforward. We have no fees. We're not a consulting firm. We don't charge a monthly rate. We are only paid out of the savings. And so if you don't like what we do, stay with what you're doing and we'll move on. But that doesn't happen.
So, yeah, right. So without naming specific systems, which I'm sure you can't, I mean, are these all small regional providers? Are they big national organizations? All of the above? What are the kind of the typical sizes, and what types of clients are you providing?
Yeah, it's almost 100% health systems. So a small little regional health system in Gulfport, Mississippi that has 450 beds, where you walk in and you're literally sitting down with the CEO and he goes, I like you guys, let's go do this. To really large systems that have 35, 40 hospitals in their network and everything in between. And a little bit of growth right now in what they call the ASC or ambulatory surgery center space, where physicians are kind of starting up their own version of a kind of quick hospital.
Sure.
Best way to describe it for consumer, but it's really
like
the mainstay.
Hospital.
If
for us Wisconsinites and those in the Midwest, they know Quick Trip.
No, but it's primarily health systems, and it can be the littlest ones to the biggest ones. They all have the same problems.
Got it. So what's the inspiration for the Honeycomb? Why do you call it the software the Honeycomb? I mean, is there something behind that? And then who creates this? Is this Rick Anderson sitting down and just creating code and building this amazing AI platform? Or how'd you come to have that tool at your disposal?
Yeah, no, they don't let me touch it.
I can imagine. You don't even really know what it is, do you?
Okay, you got me. No, actually, maybe a better thing to do is go back and start, like, why do we call ourselves the Hive?
Go for it.
And so the idea was, if you look at how bees live together, right? Each one of them has a role. There's drones, there's bees, there's workers. They all provide a unique perspective to making sure that the overall health of the hive stays good. And so I looked at the fact that with the team we have, I mean, like I said, I've known Rich for almost 30 years, Dr. Stoll for 12. I mean, Dave Lade, our CFO, was our CFO at Smart Choice. Our daughter Katie's been through 5 startups with me.
Awesome. She's a rock star too, by the way. I know Katie well.
So the bees, if you will, are teammates that we've known for years. One of our teammates, Shane Julian, was a customer at a health system in Florida. He said, I like this so much. I want to, he literally packed up his suitcase and left.
Awesome.
So that's kind of the name, if you will, the Hive and the why. And the Honeycomb was this idea, well, where do bees store everything, right?
Got it.
So
beautiful.
The gentleman that created the data set originally is Chip Locke, who was our head of data science at Smart Choice MRI.
Okay.
And then we brought in a gentleman named Brian Pitch, who's a database expert.
Okay.
I don't know what he does. I don't know how he does it, but it's brilliant. And so what happens on a regular basis is the data is constantly being updated. So we get a new final contract from a total joint vendor in the orthopedic knee space, that goes into the database, and that's real. So, and it's, from a protection and privacy standpoint, it's sitting at
my next question.
It's sitting at AWS. It's Azure originally. as far as the platform, but it was a custom build literally from the ground up. And it takes into a lot of considerations, not just price, but a lot of factors. Yeah, I can't go into all the details. But what's really great is when you go to a CFO of a health system and say, I know I'm going to buy this product for you for this price. It's like going to a car dealer and saying, I'm not going to waste my time. I know exactly how much this truck's going to cost me because I've seen it.
Yep.
So it's like the farmer's commercial, like we've seen everything. We've seen everything. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to fool us.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions that come to mind as you're going through this. I mean, first of all, think about how far we've come from the old relational databases and the whole idea that, think about like FoxPro, if you remember FoxPro from 30 years ago, and building these little kind of database programs that we used in several of our businesses to now, I mean, millions of lines of data, millions of data points, being able to use AI and machine learning to go through and analyze all that information, find the patterns. And then from a privacy standpoint, one of the questions, just to take that another step further, one of the questions I'm sure that your clients have is, okay, I'm giving you some fairly sensitive data. I mean, what I spend on some of these products is going to be super proprietary, and whether that's a publicly held health system or a smaller privately held one, what assurances do you give them in terms of how you use the data and how you won't use the data? And I'm assuming because this is all MRO and spend and purchasing data and not necessarily patient data, that the HIPAA stuff doesn't play into that. Is that correct?
That's correct. We never have any patient PHI. And the privacy thing is pretty simple. You're right. It's a great question because what we get from every health system, they give us everything. I can tell you how much they pay for toilet paper, to laptops, to syringes, to cardiac devices. Right. The database throws all that stuff out and just says that's not relevant. But the number one thing you have to do, or you're dead in this business, you just don't share data. I can say a large 13 hospital health system in the Midwest had this price and therefore you deserve it, but I'm not going to name it. It's the number one thing you just can't do, and they all respect that and they all understand that. Sure. But again, when you come at it with a team like we have of seasoned, professional physicians, they know we know the game.
For sure.
Also, it's reduced to writing. It's in the contract. The only thing we can do is what we refer to as derived data. So we can make decisions based on the data that we derive ourselves, but we would never, ever share the information.
Sure. Yeah. And as soon as you do, then of course your model falls apart. Then there's no new client is ever going to want to work with you as soon as you breach that. Yeah. So I can totally see why that's important. So talk to me a little bit, Rick, about, I could see if I'm a hospital administrator, right? And I'm reducing costs 22%. I'm standardizing, maybe in some cases, my spend. I'm getting I'm giving more suppliers access to my system, to my facility, to my doctors, to my nurses in terms of what choices they have in terms of making choices and how they provide care. Talk a little bit about, from an administrator standpoint, you're getting the cost savings. What do you see as the benefit to the physicians? Do they care? And if so, why is it important to them?
Great question. And I think there's two answers. Number one is someone always cares when you ask them, right? And you sincerely want to know what they think, right? They like to be heard. They feel a lot of times very lost in the system. They feel like no one cares about them, which I don't know that that's necessarily true. I'm not a provider, so I can't answer that directly, but they feel like there's a disconnect. And a lot of times there is. The way it really benefits them, again, as I said earlier a few questions ago, was when they say, okay, fine, I'm willing to go along with this other product or products that are less money because it's going to save the hospital money. Mm-hmm. It's not that they go right to this literally what's in it for me, but how does that improve my patient care is what you always hear, because that's the oath they took, right? Sure. So they want to know, if I help save this money, can you get me some more resources that I need? I want new ablation mapping technology. I know it's expensive, but I want it. If I help you over here, will you promise me that you will do this? I need another interventional cardiologist. I need another electrophysiologist. I need help. Yep. I need more people. As long as they can see a path, and that's what we do a lot of times with the administrators, is say, these guys are going to do this, but you got to make good on this. Yep. And that really fosters a lot of trust and a lot of bridge building.
Absolutely. Well, and as you're building that trust, they're more likely to engage with you because they saw the benefit the first time around. Mm-hmm. So that just kind of creates that snowball effect. You talk about the cost savings, you talk about the improvement of care and so on, and physicians being interested. Obviously, from a financial and administrative standpoint, the benefits are obvious. Do you have like an anecdote or a story of a specific client that's more than just, hey, we saved you 22%, but here's something, some benefit that flowed from our relationship with your organization that really, really benefited that particular provider?
Yeah, I mean, we have people, if they choose to, they can go to the hivehealth.com and look at, we have patients.
For sure. We'll link that up in the show notes too, so everybody can have a look at that website. Yep.
We have physician and actually, interesting enough, vendor testimonials on our site to say, we love the Hive Health. This is what they did for us. I think one funny story I'll tell you is there was a gentleman who's the CEO of a health system down south. And we all walked in one day and we didn't realize it, but a couple of us were wearing Gucci loafers. And I don't know why, just, we like them. And he said to his entire group of executives and most of the physicians' room, he said, I don't know who these boys are, but they're wearing Gucci loafers, so they must have done well in life. And we're going to listen to what they have to say. We saved that little hospital $7 million and we were in and out of there in about 12 weeks.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's not that we saved them money so that they could go spend it on themselves. It's that it's to stay open. You get on a plane, you go home after that, and you're like, this is worth doing.
So the lesson there is if you want to close the deal, wear your Gucci loafers. Is that just part of the lesson?
It reminds me, I remember being in an airport once and a shoe shine gentleman said to me, well, you can't close a deal with a dirty heel.
Yeah.
And I stopped. I said, that's one of the best lines I've ever heard. And I got my shoe shine. And here's the best part of that story. It was such a good shoe shine. It was in Minneapolis. I remember exactly when it happened. I missed my flight.
Oh, did you really?
But I got a good shoe shine.
Yeah, exactly. When you got on that next flight and your shoes looked absolutely phenomenal.
Okay. I was going home.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the organization itself. There was a time in my career, and you and I have talked about this a lot, where you're running a company with, in my case, 200 or 300 people, which wasn't gigantic by some people's standards, but by a small to mid-sized business standard, that's a pretty good chunk of people. Today, we've got several companies in the ed tech space separate from the Tech Ed Media Group that owns the podcast, and rather than a goal of being able to brag about how many people we have in those organizations, I always like to brag about how few people we have and how much we get done with such a small group of people. Mm-hmm. Tell us about, what does the team look like? I mean, is this a team of 500 data analysts that are doing this amazing work, or what does that look like? No, it's actually, and I'm glad you framed it that way, it's actually very lean. We've got, I think, 12, 13 people. Wow. Highly, highly specialized in what they do. And the way we've been able to scale, it's interesting, is so we have people like Katie, who I mentioned earlier, who runs all of our project management. She keeps the trains running on time. Awesome. And then you have 3 different teams: the cardiac team, which is led by Rich Kennedy and Dr. John Jeffries, who's an interventional cardiologist down in Tennessee, and Shane Julian. And then you've got the orthopedic team, which is Dr. Jim Stoll, Dr. Greg Schmaling, who runs trauma over at Freighter in the medical college, Dr. Mike Anderson, who's here in Milwaukee as well as an implanting joint surgeon. And Freighter, by the way, a healthcare provider right here in the city of Milwaukee, and a very, very well recognized one. Yeah, thank you. And then you've got the finance, you've got data, which we talked about both earlier. And then the newest thing we've just done is we stood up a lab services business. So we looked at the fact that lab was another big cost center, whether it's reagents, blood, supplies, whatever. And so these would be the people that are doing, you go in for your lab test with your doctor. This is the back end people that you don't see that are actually taking those samples and doing the analysis. The lab directors. And so another gentleman, Nick Fink, who I've known for 19, 20 years now, he ran the largest COVID testing lab in the state of Wisconsin. Remember all those tents that were up all over the place? Sure. So he ran that. And I said, I think what you've got is something really special here in terms of knowledge. And so we stood it up. We kind of call it the third leg of the stool. So you have ortho, you've got cardiac, and now you've got lab. But the best thing I would say about scale for our business is that, no, it doesn't take a lot of people, but it isn't really all that difficult to find a recently retired or soon to be retired, and I hate to say this because it's not always the case, but somewhat disgruntled surgeon who said, I just don't like the way healthcare is ending, and I want to still be heard. Right. And so you can bring these people onto a team where they know their voice matters. They want to be part of the solution. And they go home and they sleep well at night. Absolutely. I mean, as you kind of envision the future, 13, 17 clients now, growing to 100, I mean, what does the runway look like as far as growth? And, what do you target as far as where you think this organization can be? It's funny you say that, because a lot of times internally we discuss when does it end? Because the problem with the business is that, you help them and then you move on. Well, we talk a lot about growing vertically and horizontally. So my horizontal growth was add lab. We may look at what Mark Cuban's doing with cost plus drugs, right? That's an easier one because it's directly to the patient. Mm-hmm. But if you look at something like ophthalmology or oncology, we may add that. So there's your horizontal growth. Sure. On the vertical side, there's debated numbers, but let's call it 650 to 700 health systems around the country. Well, if we've done 20 in the last 3 years, we got some work to go. Yeah. But I really like the fact that we all feel like we're sort of in the Kitty Hawk stage. Like we're just learning how this is all going to play out.
not for us personally necessarily, but like, how does healthcare really change?
Sure.
So there's no talk of exits. There are no investors. We bootstrapped it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're not thinking about the end. We're thinking about the now.
Got it. And that's such a great way to kind of live life in business. And it's really about, we're thinking about the now, we're living in the moment, we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about how we can grow, we're thinking about different markets, different benefits. And I almost think of it, Rick, in my life of manufacturing, the very best, what we call Kaizen teams. So people that would go in and do continuous improvement events, driving waste out of a manufacturing process. And the very best ones would start at one end of the process and just travel through it over the course of a year. And then when they got to the end of the year and they had gone through the entire plant, they would just start over again and do it one more time. And it almost feels like with your organization, like, okay, we normalize prices to an extent by reaching more and more providers, by reaching, more and more spaces within the healthcare economy. But once that work is done once, it doesn't mean that you can't go back and do it again, right? Because you've normalized pricing once, that's going to drive efficiency. That's going to, create the survival of the fittest in a good way in the supplier and the vendor space. You just go back and do it all over again. So it almost seems like it could be an evergreen model to just keep rolling it that way.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. So right now, 2.5, 3 years into our cycle of like really standing up the business beyond what Rich started,
right?
Accretive to what he started. Now we have clients that actually have renewed for a second term.
Sure.
And you're right, because you would take something like the cardiac device space and you're like, well, we already did that.
Right.
Well, yeah, but there's way more devices and prices have gotten better and we've gotten smarter.
Sure.
So
technology's changed. Yeah.
You just show them, hey, you know what? Let's take another refresh at this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Can other markets learn from what you're doing in healthcare? I mean, I mentioned manufacturing and Kaizen and so on. And obviously, if I'm a purchasing manager in the manufacturing space, outsourcing, whether it's buying things for everything from uniforms to fasteners or contract manufacturing services, those kind of things. We spend a lot of time here in the world of education, of course, being the Tech Ed podcast, thinking about that space. So are there lessons that can be learned in other market spaces from what you've done at the Hive Health?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at, let's say, like manufacturing, and I really lean on you for this. I mean, is there a price transparency tool in the MRO space on the shop floor?
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah. And imagine if you were, and again, maybe this has already taken place, maybe it should even more so, but imagine if you're in the executive suite up on the third floor of a metal bending shop in some town.
Right.
How often are they going out to the shop floor and talking about, what do you guys need?
Right.
I think what we've learned a lot of is that everyone likes to think about our business as like a price thing. Like, we can buy price. We're actually kind of almost marriage counselors. We're really helping people understand that, like, if we work together, yes, there's a cost component, but whether it's the vendor, whether it's the provider, whether it's the end user, the client, the health system, everybody's got to get along and everybody's got to be fair to each other, or this is really not going to go anywhere. So I think for manufacturing, having some database of known prices, I mean, I'd love to know. I would have thought that you'd say, oh yeah, there's a lot of somewhat standardization. And then on the education side, I think back to that marriage counseling idea, we don't really teach critical thinking anymore. And so if you just look at healthcare, you say, well, it's broken. The administrators are running it. The doctors are unhappy. The nurses are burned out. So that's just what it is. And it's like, well, take it all in and think about it. Learn how to process that and come up with a solution. And don't be like, and I'm guilty of this because I talk for a living, is I'm always so fast to try and find, let's fix it. But it's like trying to be better at critical thinking and looking at all the opportunities across the horizon. I think that's missing. And maybe as we look at our educators to say, who am I to say this, but to focus on that, to think about that. Yeah.
No, we think, I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about education in the age of artificial intelligence. And what you're talking about is exactly where it's going. It's going to be way more personalized. It's going to be way more about what am I interested in doing? How do I learn specifically? Because every learner learns differently. And then how do we create a portfolio competency portfolio, I should say, over time of these are the courses I've been through. These are the certifications that I've earned. This is the diploma that I have. These are my experiences. These are my projects, and really create a well-rounded student. And I think what you're saying kind of speaks directly to the future of education, where things are going in the education space. Should be interesting to watch. Yeah,
and I think just to maybe add to that a little bit more is one of the things that initially really shocked me was when I talked to some of the brightest surgeons on the planet. So Dr. John Jeffries, who runs our CV team along with Rich and Shane, I tease him, I call him the underperformer. So, I mean, he's brilliant. He's published probably 300 papers. He's the team cardiologist for the Memphis Grizzlies. He decided he wanted to go get his MBA, so he went to Wharton.
Awesome. Yeah.
I mean, so it's like,
why wouldn't you, right?
Okay. But what he's taught me, and what Dr. Stoll has taught me in particular, is that we were never trained as physicians to be business people. We don't have that rounding because we were just deep into what we had to do. So, yeah, I mean, if you're seeing that in education where that more well-rounded, balanced approach is occurring, then I think that's good for all of us.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. So does the story of healthcare in America end well? I mean, we've got some things that aren't going so well now. If we turn the clock forward 10, 20, 30 years, is it going to be a good ending? What do you think?
I do. And I'm an optimist. I have to think that way. And I'm glad you asked that because it felt like even some of the first few questions we were talking through was like this doom and gloom. It's because it's real.
Right.
You know, it's not like we're just making this up. But I wouldn't just leave it out there like, well, something has to change so it'll be okay. But I still believe in people. I think the providers out there that are working their tails off really care. And I think maybe at times they're frustrated, but if we lose that, we're in trouble.
Right.
The business side of it will take care of itself. You know, we're probably going to see some consolidation. We're probably going to see some hard discussions. You know, I don't see a decline, and I don't know this. Maybe the data will prove me wrong.
Right.
I don't see a massive decline in people going to med school or nursing school. Nursing was a little bit challenged lately.
Especially during COVID. Yeah. Good. So brighter days ahead.
I think so, yeah.
And we still have a phenomenal, in so many ways, healthcare system here in America. It's not perfect. It's certainly got some issues that need to be addressed, but a lot of great things going forward as well. So I think, you know, certainly kind of wrapping up on that high note, not quite done yet. You know, you talk about you believe in people. You've had so many people who believed in you, Rick, over the course of your career. I know your mom and dad, you know your family, know your history. I've seen pictures of you on your parents' mantle as a 15-year-old high school sophomore. Incredibly nice-looking young man, by the way. I want to take you back to that tight time of your life, that 15-year-old Rick Anderson. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You're growing up, northeastern part of Illinois as a Bears fan, unfortunately, but we'll look past that. And you've got your whole life ahead of you. And if you could go and give that young man one little piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, first, be a Bears fan because it teaches you humility.
Yeah, right. Especially this year, right?
Yeah. I remember that we had talked recently about, sort of how you do your interviews, and that was a question that you asked often. And I was like, I was really, didn't take me long to get the answer, but I was excited for it. I would say the advice I would give myself is get wisdom.
Yeah.
And so though it costs you everything, get it.
How do you define wisdom? Go ahead.
Well, so if you think about it, my job, as we talked about a minute ago, is an optimist, right? I can be pretty good at finance, but I don't have to be great. I'm pretty okay at operations, but I don't have to be great. But I mean, I remember you told me this quote years ago, and that was a CEO lets his team speak or her team speak. I don't think I'm great at that always. I'd be the first to admit it. But here's why, if I was 15, I would have really, really emphasized wisdom in my growing years and my years as a leader, is that wisdom is the great protector. It saves you from so many mistakes.
Sure.
Because as an optimist, I'm like, every investor is going to be the best. Right. Every board member will be phenomenal. Everything's going to work out great. And when you put wisdom on the sidelines in favor of growth and success and all that, you will pay for it. And so for me, I think about the people like my wife, Dana, of 33 years, almost 34.
Congratulations. Amazing woman, by the way. I know her well, too.
Thank you. And she'll thank you. And she'll tell you that putting up with me is mostly good. But
she doesn't have to tell me that. I already know that.
No, but I think all these people I talked about that have been alongside of me as teammates for, like Rich, 30 years to someone like Brian, our data guys, have been with us a year, right? Is I don't know how many people would ever use the word leader and not want to put Y's in front of it. And so at 15, I would have said, get it no matter what it costs you.
Awesome. 200 episodes in. You're the first person, by the way, to say wisdom, get wisdom. So I love that answer. We love when we get unique answers to that question here on the Tech Ed Podcast. We ask it of every single guest. We've certainly gained, Rick, a lot of wisdom from you about the Hive Health, about the use of data in healthcare, about how healthcare can be better, about the incredible work that you're doing. So can't thank you enough for joining us. You're a great friend. You're a great guest. Guest number 200, or at least episode number 200, from 2 to 200. It's been a great journey for you over these last 4 years. We're certainly proud of the journey we've been on, and we're proud that you were able to join us here on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you. I just have one last question.
Go for it.
Like on Saturday Night Live, they have the 5 Timers Club where you get like a special jacket.
Right.
This is my second, I'm sure you've had other guests on more than once. Are we in a club of some sort?
So for starters, we call it the Tech Ed Podcast Alumni Circle, right? Okay. And it is, when you talk about wisdom, it is an incredibly wise group of people that we've had on this podcast. I've learned so much from them. Our all-time leading scorer, if you will, is Mike Chico. He's the president and CEO of Fanuc America, largest robotics company in the world. Mike has been on 4 times. We've had several two-time guests, but I think what I'm going to have to do is put my head together with Melissa, our producer, and we got to come up with some type of a plaque or a special jacket with an emblem or something. We'll work on that. And in any event, we hope you'll come back again, and whatever that goal is that we set in terms of the prize for appearances on the podcast, that you'll come back and stay on the journey with us, because it's been a fun journey and it's been great having you, Rick.
Yeah, we'll tell Mike I'm coming for him.
All right, exactly. Well, I don't have to tell him. He'll hear it right here on this episode of the podcast. Our audience got to hear a great episode of the Tech Ed podcast this week. Had so much fun talking to my friend Rick Anderson, learning about the great work that he's doing. So I have to thank the audience for being with us. We had a bunch of topics that came up. We'll link all that, the website to the Hive Health, some of the resources that Rick talked about. We'll link all those up in the show notes. We have the best show notes in the business. We will put those this week at techedpodcast.com/hive. That's techedpodcast.com/HIVE. When you are done checking out the show notes, be sure to check us out on social media. We are all over. You will find us on TikTok. You'll find us on LinkedIn. You'll find us on Instagram. You'll find us on Facebook. When you do find us, say hello. Let us know how much you enjoy the podcast. Also, leave a review for us if you're on Apple Music, if you're on Spotify and you love the podcast. We would love to hear from you there. I will love to hear from everybody and be with everybody in our audience again next week on the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, my name is Matt Kirchner. I am your host. Thank you for being with us.